Hello history buffs and welcome back to the channel. I'm Hannah, and with the release of season 2 of Wolf Hall, I'm going to be going back through season 1 and then eventually season 2 and telling you all of the Easter eggs and references I found in each episode. Please note that this is not a review, nor is it a what was accurate video, as this is adapted from historical fiction. In the next scene, Henry and Anne are out hunting. Both are wearing red. There's a few things we can take away from this. The fact that they are wearing the same colour signifies they are currently on good terms, as Anne is pregnant again. They are both wearing red, and the only people, minus the guards, to be doing so are Anne and Henry. So this is a sign of regality and royalty, but also symbolising that they are out for blood. Anne is trying all she can to secure her and Elizabeth's place and diminish her enemies, while Henry is trying to keep his wife happy, pursue Jane, and also keep his enemies at bay, and as a couple dissolve the monasteries and bring forth the Protestant Revolution. Henry then tells Cromwell, "Ambassador Chapuis has never acknowledged my wife as queen. Until he is prepared to bow before her, publicly, there will be no diplomacy with that man." This line is an epic bit of foreshadowing for those who are in the know. In April 1536, so literally a month before Henry had Anne beheaded, Henry staged a moment where Chapuis was basically forced to bow to Anne as she walked past him in the church, inadvertently acknowledging Anne as queen. It is said that Chapuis was beside himself afterwards. Catherine of Aragon dies, which means it is now the 7th of January 1536. We cut from Catherine's lady sobbing to Anne Boleyn being jubilant. Little did she know that with Catherine gone, so is her safety net. We then see that Henry and Anne are hosting to celebrate Catherine's passing and the threat of Spain disappearing. And I know it could be argued that they were mourning, not celebrating. I will go into that, but in this context of the series, it does seem more like a triumph. Notably, they are wearing yellow, a colour of which its meaning has been debated by some historians. Some say it was a sign of respect, as the colour of mourning in Spain was yellow. However, some argue that it was a bright colour and then could not possibly be done as a sign of respect, but rather as a sign of celebration, which is how it's coming across in this scene. Alison Weir goes further into detail on this matter in her book, The 6 Wives of King Henry VIII. Quote, "Both Henry and Anne wore yellow, the colour of royal mourning in Spain, as a mark of respect. However, some historians view this as a snub to Catherine, dancing, enjoying life in bright colours, rather than being sombre and wearing black, the English colour of mourning." Also, Henry and Anne are wearing the same colour, and again, the two are working in unison. The other thing of note is that Henry has the young Princess Elizabeth at his hip, and he is parading her round the room as a doting father. A trait not commonly associated with Henry, but it did happen on occasions. Again, this did happen going back to Alison Weir. Quote, "The Princess Elizabeth was paraded round the room in the arms of her father, who took great pleasure in showing off his child." Henry then hands Cromwell a letter that had been written by Catherine, not wanting it. This is also true. Catherine continued to write to Henry against his wishes. In fact, Catherine wrote a letter to Henry, probably this letter, on the last evening of her life, and she signed it as Catherine the Queen. Cromwell is then informed that Richard Rich says the king wants Catherine's plate and furs. Cromwell then gazes at Jane, the person who Henry probably wants these furs for. He then looks at Henry gazing at Jane, and then Anne catching Henry looking at Jane, which riles Anne up. Only problem is that in her will, Catherine left her daughter Mary the collar of gold which I brought out of Spain, and her furs. However, in actuality, he refused, and he didn't give Mary her furs either. Anne could have learnt so much from how Henry is treating his dead ex-wife, but instead she is too consumed by Jane Seymour. They then also make a very valid point that if the king really wasn't ever married to Catherine, as he claims, then he has no right to her furs. But classic Henry picks and chooses what part of the law applies to him. Also, you could say that this does align with Henry's Catholic beliefs at heart. Remember, despite the fact he brought in the Protestant Reformation, he was never really a Protestant. We then cut to Catherine's funeral, where we hear a snippet of what was in Catherine's final letter to Henry, which was based on her real letter. I commend unto you, Mary, our daughter.
I commend unto you, our daughter, Mary.
Beseeching you to be a good father to her.
Beseeching you to be a good father to her.
I must entreat you also to look after my maids, and give them in marriage, which is not much, they being but 3, and to my other servants a year's pay, besides their due, lest otherwise they should be unprovided for, until they find new employment. Lastly, I want only one true thing, to make this vow, that in this life mine eyes desire you alone. May God protect you.
And lastly, I make this vow, that mine eyes desire you above all things.
We then cut to a scene where Anne's bedroom is on fire. This did actually happen, not long after the death of Catherine of Aragon. The fire in Anne Boleyn's chamber, as depicted in Wolf Hall, was based on a real historical event that occurred in early January 1536. According to Lancelot de Cales, secretary to the French ambassador, the incident was indeed serious. A furious flame suddenly erupted in the Queen's chamber, catching Anne by surprise. She narrowly escaped thanks to a timely warning and assistance from someone nearby, likely one of her ladies-in-waiting. The severity of the fire was such that Anne not left immediately, she would have been in grave danger. This event held both practical and symbolic significance in the context of Anne's reign. A widespread prophecy existed that a Queen of England would be burned, which Anne had previously dismissed. The fire eerily echoed this prediction, potentially fueling superstitions and fears among the Tudor court. Given the prevalence of omens and superstitions in Tudor England, this incident could have been interpreted as a bad omen for Anne's future. The fire may have contributed to Anne's increasing stress and anxiety, possibly playing a role in her subsequent miscarriage later that month, which further weakened her already precarious position at court. In Wolf Hall's dramatisation, the incident is used to fuel rumours and speculation about Anne's behaviour, including suggestions of her midnight visitors to her chamber. While this is a fictional interpretation, it reflects the growing scrutiny and gossip surrounding Anne during this critical period. Ultimately, the fire in Anne Boleyn's chamber, though a relatively minor incident in itself, serves as a powerful symbol of the dangers and uncertainties that surrounded her in the months leading up to her downfall. It encapsulates the precarious nature of her position as queen and foreshadows the tragic events that would unfold later that year, culminating in her execution on the 19th of May, 1536. Anne then tells Cromwell in French that there is a prophecy about an English queen being burned. I'm assuming she speaks in French as she doesn't want Henry to hear, but Henry spoke French, so I'm not sure why she didn't just speak in English, unless it was to suggest that it was a French prophecy. Not too sure on that one. We then see Gregory getting ready for his first joust, visibly disappointed that his father will not be present at the event. Also worthy of note is the Tudor rose hanging in the background. You can see that Thomas is trying to soften the disappointment to Gregory by telling him that the king believes that Gregory is a credit to the house of Cromwell, and he agrees with the king, which does put a smile on Gregory's face. Thomas is clearly worried for Gregory's safety. He asks the king in the previous scene to go easy on Gregory, to which he basically says no. He goes to leave the tent that Gregory is in and then comes back, only to give Gregory some second-hand advice. His last word of advice is survive. We can infer that the reason Thomas Cromwell is going to be absent from his son's first joust is because he can't bring himself to watch it, in case his only child, son, and heir dies, which is a very valid concern as people did die from jousting accidents. Henry had a few close calls himself, as we will see. One of the most gripping sequences in Wolf Hall is the dramatisation of Henry VIII's jousting accident, a moment that underscores the fragility of Tudor England's political stability. When news reaches Thomas Cromwell that the king's horse has fallen on him and he appears dead, Cromwell instinctively arms himself with a knife and rushes to the scene. Inside a chaotic tent, Henry lies unconscious, surrounded by nobles in panic. The Duke of Norfolk shouts, "A woman cannot rule," expressing anxieties about Queen Anne and the lack of a male heir. George Boleyn turns his anger on Cromwell, ominously declaring, "You're a dead man." The looming possibility of Henry's death threatens civil war and national disintegration. Amid this turmoil, it is Cromwell who keeps his composure, working to revive the king. When Henry regains consciousness, the immediate crisis passes, but the moment leaves Cromwell visibly shaken. Later, he confides in William Fitzwilliam. How many men can say that their only friend is the King of England? You think I have everything, but take Henry away? Fitzwilliam seizes the moment to warn Cromwell to join Anne Boleyn's enemies, noting, "If she has a son, the Boleyns will walk our backs." This scene captures the high stakes of Tudor politics, where the king's survival directly impacted the kingdom's stability. Henry's death at this moment would have plunged England into chaos, as his legitimate heirs were limited to his daughters, Mary, declared illegitimate after his divorce from Catherine of Aragon, and Elizabeth, an infant born to Anne Boleyn. Norfolk's cry, "A woman cannot rule," reflects the era's pervasive doubt about female monarchs and the precarious nature of succession. Cromwell's actions highlight his unique ability to remain composed under pressure, but also revealed his vulnerability. His power depends entirely on Henry's favour. The scene also foreshadows the growing strength of Anne Boleyn's enemies, who capitalised on her failure to produce a male heir. Fitzwilliam's warning reflects the factionalism that defined Henry's court, where power was fleeting and alliances shifted rapidly. Henry's jousting accident symbolises the precariousness of Tudor politics, where a single event could threaten the kingdom's stability. It also hints at the fate of those closest to power, as even Cromwell, who revived the king in this moment, would eventually meet his own downfall at Henry's hands. We then cut to Anne's fall. Mary. We can hear Anne's screams. Mary serves as the narrator for us, the audience, as she pretends to give birth with her doll. She stamps on it, showing us that the child is dead, and she leaves the room. We see a bloody cloth, reaffirming that Mary's reenactment did indeed happen. This miscarriage happened days after Henry's jousting accident, and on the day of Catherine of Aragon's funeral. The imperial ambassador Eustace Chapuis would go on to tell Emperor Charles V that Anne had miscarried a male child, which she had not borne 3.5 months. He described it as the loss of her saviour, suggesting the critical importance of this pregnancy for Anne's position as queen. Jane Boleyn, Lady Rochford, then relays the news to Henry, to which he says, "What do you mean it appears to be male?" She tells him that she's just telling him what the doctors said. Angry, Henry dismisses her rather harshly, saying, "Oh, get away with you, woman. You've never given birth. What do you know?" Henry then says, "I see God will not give me male children." This is a quote that is often attributed to Henry. In the aftermath of Anne Boleyn's latest miscarriage, Henry VIII's frustration and despair reached a boiling point. Addressing Cromwell, he laments, "If a king cannot have a son, if he cannot give stability to his realm, then it doesn't matter what else he can do. The victories, the just law, the famous court, nothing." For Henry, fatherhood and dynastic security are the ultimate measures of his kingship, and his inability to secure a male heir increasingly undermines his authority. The conversation takes a dangerous turn when Henry remarks to Cromwell and Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, "It seems to me that I was dishonestly led into this marriage, and if that were so, the marriage would be null, wouldn't it?" This veiled accusation hints at his growing discontent with Anne and suggests that Henry is already contemplating her removal under the guise of an annulment. Cromwell and Cranmer exchange uneasy glances, fully aware of the political and personal peril embedded in Henry's words. Henry then says, "With spells, women would do such things," implying that he had been coerced into this unlawful marriage by witchcraft. Again, another nod to one of Henry's beliefs. Although it's worth pointing out that Anne was never formally charged with witchcraft, it is just alleged that Henry VIII reportedly told one of his courtiers that he had been seduced and forced into the second marriage by means of sortileges and charms. And that's where I'm going to end today's video. Episode 5 has so many Easter eggs and historical references that this will be a 3-parter, and then we have one more episode in Season 1 before we move on to Season 2. I love breaking down the series, however it takes a lot of time and energy preparing the series, and I am finding it a struggle right now, so once Season 1 is finished, I will be taking a break before tackling Season 2. I do hope you guys all understand. However, in the meantime, if there are any other movies or TV shows you would like me to do once I've finished Wolf Hall, then please do let me know. As always, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and if you really enjoyed this content, then why not leave a super thanks. But until the next one guys, have a wonderful day.